Welcome to the first broadcast of our 2021-2022 DLI webinar series. This is a series for our dual language immersion or DLI community of educators, and everyone is welcome. Today's focus is on collaboration with stakeholders and community partners. These webinars are quarterly, and I, along with my co-lead for our DLI team, are excited to welcome you to this first one. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And I'm going to stop here and ask my colleague, my partner on DLI, to introduce herself as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Ivana Manthor Anderson, the ESL side of the co-lead with DLI. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Sure. And just to let you know, I'm going to actually turn my camera off because we are recording. And so I want to make sure everything gets captured without any technology problems. So having a webcam on can kind of be a strain on a Wi-Fi system. But again, welcome to our first broadcast. You can see we're looking at collaboration using a tool there on the left-hand side. And as we get into the broadcast, I'll share more with you about that. So to begin with today, up on the screen, we have our agenda. We just did our welcome and some basic introductions, but we're going to do some introductions with you here in a minute too. Then we're going to go into an overview of the Tel criteria, and that's what our focus is in professional learning this particular school year. Tel stands for Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. There's a Tel project, and what we're actually looking at are the Tel framework documents for the different criteria. There are 7 different criteria or domains that we look at, and so each broadcast in the DLI webinar series has a very particular focus based on the needs of DLI programs and classrooms. The Tel project and framework is available for free. It's a nationally produced, research-based tool that we can use in all of our language learning programs. And so we're happy to share it with you today as part of our work that we do in North Carolina. But as I said, since Tel is a national document, many people are using these materials in their language programs. Today's focus is on collaboration, as I said. So the Tel criteria of collaboration has 5 different criteria with its own sub-criteria. We're going to look at collaboration 3 or CO3, which you see up there on the screen that says the teacher facilitates frequent two-way communication with stakeholders. Now remember, like it says at the bottom with a little asterisk, and the Tel criteria statements, teacher in our case applies to any DLI educator. So it could be a teacher, it could be an instructional coach, it could be a media specialist, it could be a principal, it could be a central office coordinator, or maybe another role in education. So after we do an overview of that, we're going to have a time to do some reflections on implementing CO3 in our K-12 DLI programs and in our pedagogy in those programs. Then we're going to do an activity where we get 2 perspectives on CO3, and specifically we're going to talk about communicating with stakeholders by collaborating with the media. And that's the media in our local realm, if you will, where our DLI programs and classes are located. Then we'll talk about evidence of CO3 characteristics and behaviors in our K-12 DLI programs and pedagogy, because one of the strengths of our Tel project and Tel framework materials is that they can be used to do some self-evaluation and some reflection on what characteristics and behaviors really focus on effective language learning practices. And so we're going to use that today and do some activities with you that you can take back and replicate in your own local professional learning. At the end of the time we have together, we're going to do some wrap up and some reminders, and we actually have a surprise for you today, something new for all DLI programs across North Carolina that will make it easier for us to be connected and aware of each other. So that's our plan for today and our agenda. We do have an hour and a half to do this broadcast, and we're very excited about that. Feedback from our previous series in the past several years has told us we need a little more time than an hour, but not quite as long as 2 hours, which we did last year, because we want to facilitate some discussion between participants who come to our broadcast. So that's our goal for today, is to have some activities and things like that that get you to talk about what you're doing in your own K-12 DLI programs and classrooms, and share that with others and get some feedback on it. So we'll begin with the rest of our welcome and introductions. We're going to use our control panel quite a bit to do our activities and to do, first of all, our introductions here in a moment. And so I want to make sure everyone is familiar with our WebEx event control panel. You see here on the screen sort of a screenshot of what that could look like. This screenshot, I think, is from a computer display of it. So it may look a little bit different if you're on a computer, depending on which browser you chose to log in with today, or how big your screen is, of course. If you're on a smart device joining us, that's fine too. But again, your control panel may look a little different based on the app that goes with WebEx events. You see there that usually your control panel and pieces of it are on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can do things like control the video layout. So you can like double click on, let's say, the presentation space so you can have the slides as large as possible on your device. And you can actually move that out into another window if you need to. You can choose the floating panel view, and that's where you can sort of arrange where you want your control panel to be. Notice that the meeting controls that it points out there in the middle give you a lot of control. On the left-hand side, you'll see the little microphone one, and it's got a slash through it. That's because in a webinar, everyone is on mute so that we can record easily without any kind of background noise. But then going further on there, you can see that you can go to the chat. That's a little blow-up bubble. And there are other places, other controls that you have to see who else is here and that kind of thing. One thing I will tell you, at the end, you'll need to click that little red button with an X in it. That exits you from our webinar today. If you accidentally hit it and need to come back in, don't worry. You can use the same link as you used before to join us. And then also in your control panel, there's a list of our meeting information, things like connection information and whatnot. So that's the control panel. And so we're going to get started using that by doing our first activity, our poll question for introductions. So our poll question is, what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? And you can check all that apply. Was it you wanted to access professional development made for DLI? Or you wanted to earn 1.5 contact hours for license renewal? Maybe you want to gather information to share with colleagues? Or learn about implementing DLI programs more effectively? Or perhaps you want to find out more about DLI program resources, policies, networking, and the like. So Ivana has put our poll up, and I see she has opened it. Everyone's already answering. Again, check all that apply to your motivations for today. Got about 10 seconds left, so be sure you get your responses in. All right. Thank you for responding. And I think, Ivana, are you planning on sharing the results with everybody too?
I have clicked apply for the poll results to show for all attendees. I don't see it on my screen when that happens, so I'm hoping that it happened.
Okay, great. So in your control panel, you should see sort of how everyone answered. And it looks like our most popular motivations today are to access professional development made for DLI. And that's one of the primary reasons we actually do this webinar series, is to make sure that you have access to that. Or to learn about implementing DLI programs more effectively. And again, we're always focused on that, but particularly we're using a new lens with those TEL project materials. There are also several people here who want to earn 1.5 contact hours for license renewal. And as long as you actively participate in a broadcast, you will get a certificate emailed to you after our broadcast with that information. And some are here to gather information to share with colleagues. And you're always welcome to share what we post in the archives, whether it's these slides themselves, or maybe you modify these slides to share, or use the recording, or whatever you need to do for your local professional development and work. There's also a good number of people here who want to find out more about DLI program resources, policies, and networking. And I can assure you we're definitely going to talk about that. But if you have individual questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat. You can send them to everyone if it's a general question, or just send it to Yvonne and I with hosts and panelists. All right, well, moving on, the second thing we want to know is where are you joining us from today? We are both based in Raleigh, but we know you are from all over the state and maybe from all over the country or around the world. And so we ask you where you're joining us from today, and you'll see when Ivana puts the poll question up that you can answer one of the 8 different State Board of Education districts in our state, or outside of North Carolina in the US or outside of the US. So let's go ahead and respond to that. Find out where you are today. Notice that the 8 regions we have across the state are part of our State Board of Education districts, meaning that each region has its own representative on our State Board of Education. These regions are also what are called the economic development regions by our state legislature. And so we group things like this in North Carolina to provide resources and materials to our schools and to other organizations, of course, across the state. All right, we've got about 10 seconds. Make sure you get your answer in.
Right, we've got about 8 seconds. About half of the people have responded.
One way you receive your certificate of participation is to actively participate in our broadcast, including the activities like this. All right. So Ivana, you can show the results unless you have already, which you may have. Looks like we have a smattering of people from across the state. I see Region 3, Region 4, Region 5, Region 3, 5, and 6. Great. And no one right now who's outside of North Carolina anyway, but you know.
Oh, but yes, there is. It came through the chat box. We have someone from Virginia.
Welcome to our Virginia colleagues. We're so pleased to have you from Virginia. I think most of you know, but just in case you don't, North Carolina and Virginia, because of course we are neighboring states, we have a lot in common in our educational systems. And we have been sharing information, particularly about dual language immersion programs for a number of years, as each of our states has grown in the number of programs they offer and in the number of locations across our states and districts where they're available. So welcome to everyone. All right, so those are our introduction questions. We know why you're here. We know kind of where you're from. So let's go ahead and move on to the overview of the Tel Criteria we're working with today and the sub-criteria. As I said, the Tel Criteria itself is this CO3. The teacher facilitates frequent two-way communication with stakeholders. Although it's probably better to say the DLI educator facilitates frequent two-way communication with stakeholders. So I want us to take a closer look at that and really think that through. And again, like I said, the Tel Criteria materials are really developed for reflection and for considering how far you've come with your DLI program or classroom and what your next steps might be to make it even better. So our next activity is simple and straightforward. Just like any teacher, we want to make sure you have the handout of the materials we're going to use. So Ivana's already put in the chat box the handout, and you can download the handout in 3 different ways, your choice. In our chat box, it's linked as a PDF Google link in our Google Drive, so you can click on that. It should come up on your screen. It's also on our DLI webinar series webpage for this particular broadcast. And you can also go to the TEL Framework webpage at the University of Maryland if you want to get it from there. I do want to share with you that the TEL Collaboration Domain Criteria document is from 2019. The TEL project first became available to the public in 2014, and over time has made improvements and adjustments and released updated documents in all 7 domains in 2019. So you're getting the latest and greatest information about the collaboration domain from TEL. So download a copy for yourself, and then we want you to skim the 4-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus. So find CO3 on that document you download, and then read the sub-criteria that go with it. We'll pause for a moment while you do that and answer any questions. All right, I hope you've had time to download the document and also take a look at the sub-criteria that go with CO3. That's what we'll be focusing on today. And don't worry, this handout and these 3 different ways to download it will be posted also in our archives so that you can come back to it later and use it locally if you want to. So let's take a look at our Tel criteria and its sub-criteria and very carefully consider what that tells us about how and what we should be looking at for our DLI programs and classrooms. So you've seen the main statement. The first sub-criteria is the teacher or the DLI educator maximizes ongoing communication between teacher and students outside of class. So we're all experienced educators here. Pause for a moment and think to yourself of at least one example of a DLI educator doing that. All right, I'm sure you probably thought of more than one example for this particular sub-criteria, but consider that educators, whether they're teachers or administrators or have some other role, are always looking to connect with their students or with their learners, even outside of class. We do that in a lot of different ways, sometimes depending on how old the students are. I think to myself as a teacher, there are times where I help with carpool line or bus duty or recess or PTA meetings and things. And later on, at the secondary level, you can reach out to students outside of class if you attend their sporting events or participate in their extracurricular activities or do some things like that, as well as just be seen in the community where your school is. So there's lots of options there. The next sub-criteria is the DLI educator participates in frequent communication with other key stakeholders. So again, I'm going to have you think for just a moment. Who are your key stakeholders for your DLI programs and classrooms? All right, so you probably got a good idea in mind who your key stakeholders are. And they might be people like your students' parents or your colleagues or the administrators in your building or your district. Might even be people like your local school board members or charter board members, or perhaps people in the community like parents, but also others in the community who are beyond even daily interaction with your students, like parents would be. Maybe it's people in the business community around you, or maybe it's companies that have a large investment in the community and help support the schools in some significant way through their organization. Those are all of our stakeholders. All right, the next sub-criteria is the DLI educator partners with other educators to expand their understanding of language development. And again, I'm going to ask you to pause because this can be a challenging one, given that most DLI programs that are in a school are the first opportunity that educators, your colleagues, have had to understand what learning a language through a DLI program really means. So again, think about who a DLI educator could partner with when it comes to other educators to help them understand language development. All right, I hope you have several people in mind. And again, it could be your colleagues who work most closely with you, maybe your partner teacher who teaches in English, if you're a DLI classroom teacher, could be your administrators, assistant principals, or others who work with teachers like instructional coaches to make sure the DLI program is moving forward the way it needs to be, or even other educators beyond your building, maybe people like your superintendent, or depending on how you're arranged, you might have different attendance zone and schools within them, and assistant superintendents that manage those kinds of things. So there's lots of people you could partner with who are also educators. And finally, the last sub-criteria is the DLI educator collaborates with other educators to support learning. And this is always an important one for us, as we know we want to work with our colleagues to support all of our students. And of course, we're focused on supporting their learning. But think again to yourself, who do you collaborate with? Which other educators to support learning in your DLI program or classrooms? All right. I hope you came up with a list of people, maybe one or two folks you're thinking of very specifically, other educators that help support that learning that's happening. All right, so now that we know what the sub-criteria are and we've had moments to reflect on each one, now we're going to look at how we implement CO3 in K-12 DLI programs and pedagogy that happens. So our activity number 3 takes a little more time. So once Ivana launches it, which I know she hasn't done yet, but once she does, you'll actually have a couple minutes to think about this. Because what we want you to do is when you think about your DLI programs and classrooms, which of the sub-criteria are professional strengths for you as a DLI educator? So there you see the sub-criteria again. Which of these are professional strengths for you? Now just choose one or two. All right. Go ahead and launch when you're ready, Ivana.
It's open and we are getting responses already. So we want to encourage you, if you've not answered yet, to go ahead and be looking at those choices. We really appreciate the participation for a number of reasons. One, because it helps us know you're here and that what we're doing is valuable to you. But two, it also helps us to know how to distribute those certificates, because as Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, the participation is a very important part of the webinar. So thank you. I'm seeing some more coming in. We've got just a little over 30 seconds left. We've got about 15 seconds left, and out of 14 people have completed, so thank you. We'd love to have all 14 of you. And 5 more seconds. And I will show the results.
Great, thank you. Now, these sub-criteria obviously are our focus for today. And so what Ivana is showing you now with the responses is going to stay up for a while so that as we go through some of the other activities today, you'll be able to reference those sub-criteria either in your control panel or in however you downloaded our handout. Let's take a look. It looks like a strength for many people is actually sub-criteria D. The DLI educator collaborates with other educators to support learning. That's excellent because we know we can have the most impact, obviously, with our colleagues who are right around us. And our fellow teachers or administrators most closely involved with the DLI program and our DLI classrooms are the likely candidates for that. So let's pause for a moment, since there are so many of you who said D as a professional strength. Talk a moment in the chat, if you want, about who you're collaborating with. Who are those other educators that you collaborate with to support learning in your DLI program or DLI classroom? One thing to keep in mind is that this might be informal, collaboration or formal collaboration. So it might be informal, just the chats you have with your fellow teachers or administrators who are right there in the same building with you as a DLI educator. Or it might be something more formal, maybe a mentorship situation or professional development that your school is doing or your district is doing about DLI.
Great. So we have a few answers that have come in. Bettina says special education, reading specialist, peers in other districts, and more. Casey says classroom teacher, special areas teachers. Evelyn says partner, sorry, I can't read, in other high schools. So we have quite a variety coming in so far.
That's great. And it's good to see such a variety when we think about serving the needs of our students. Of course, we're always focused on that as educators, but you know, partnering with a special education teacher can be important because if you have students in your DLI program or classrooms who have special needs, we want to make sure that those needs are being met and they can be successful right along with their peers who don't have those kinds of challenges. Also, a reading specialist is important. We know, particularly early on in the elementary programs, you know, we're teaching language arts, often in the DLI program language, and not teaching English language arts until, you know, second or third grade, depending on the program when they start. So connecting with that reading specialist can be critical, particularly if you have students either struggling and you need to kind of work with them a little bit more carefully, or if you have students excelling and going way beyond where they might go, particularly in that K2 range. You want to keep them challenged so they don't get bored. Several people also mentioned peers in other districts. So you network across districts so you can talk about your DLI programs and sort of compare and contrast and learn from each other. Obviously, other classroom teachers or special area teachers, because they are also serving your learners and you want to work together to help them. And partners in other
colleagues from, and our colleagues from Virginia pointed out, or across states, that we can also collaborate across our states, which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's always an advantage because whether we're partnering with other schools in our district, like our high school where our students are going to after they leave, let's say, elementary or middle school, or it's across states where we can learn from each other and think about what we can apply in our own setting that works very well and what lessons have been learned from others who are willing to share so that we don't make similar stumbles in implementing our programs. All right. Well, thank you for sharing about subcriteria D. The next most popular one, almost as many votes for being a strength, is C. The DLI educator partners with other educators to expand their understanding of language development. And here's something that's sort of very unique to DLI programs. It's language development because, as I said before, many of our colleagues and even parents of our students and guardians and so forth did not experience a DLI program as a student. And so they're learning about this as their students and children are immersed, literally, in a DLI program. And so we need to talk with them and make sure they understand how language development works, whether it's first language development or second language development, sometimes called first language acquisition, second language acquisition. This is something that we all need to be focused on, sort of regardless of where we are in the K-12 spectrum or beyond, but also to think about what is it they need to know about language development so they do understand it and they understand how those language skills grow over time for our students and how they transfer the things they learn in one language into the other language, whether that's their first language or their second language, whether it's their home language or the DLI program language, because we have different types of DLI programs. So again, I'll pause and ask you, how do you expand the understanding of language development with other educators? Can you think of a specific thing you've done that you really found helpful in helping other educators understand language development, especially if they weren't a generalist like at the elementary or a language arts teacher of some kind? Let's say there's science or math or physical education or some other area. How'd you do that? And Ivana, while we're waiting for responses, you might want to talk a little bit about how this works with English learners in our DLI programs. How does their language development work?
How is their language development supported? Is that what you said?
Yeah, supported, or how do you help others understand how their language development is supported or is expanding in a DLI program?
So in a DLI program or in any program, we're very excited right now that we have adopted the 2020 version of the WIDA standards as the ELD standard course of study. And it has always been the case that if you have an English learner, we want you to be working with those standards. But these new version of the standards give us an option where we have language expectations that look more like the content standards that are going to help us be able to show the teachers how they're already doing so much of this, but help them to focus on language purposefully. So we know that when we are focusing on language acquisition, whether it's DLI, ESL, world languages, there are some things that all of the stakeholders need to be aware of. And so having the opportunity to speak a language that's already out there with the standards, I think is one of the most exciting things for us right now. I don't know if that's the part you were thinking of or not, Anne Marie, but that's what came to my mind immediately.
That's always an important part to share. And I see we've got a couple people responding to this too. One person says you partner with peers who can speak the native language of the students. So again, if that's English, like in a one-way program where it's primarily native English speaking students being immersed in the DLI program language, or whether that's native speakers or heritage speakers of the DLI program language. You know, partnering with peers who can speak that language is always helpful. And as Ashley has noted, their insight is invaluable. Oh, and I see Bettina, our colleague from Virginia, is sharing that they've actually developed a DLI 101 professional learning that they do for anyone who's interested. And they intentionally seek out schools that don't yet offer a DLI program to help them better understand how that language development would work in a DLI program, and to understand, I'm guessing, the basics of how dual language immersion works in schools in general. Because again, most people just aren't familiar with it as a student themselves, or even perhaps as an educator, until they encounter their first DLI program. All right, seeing a lot of people say, that's awesome, what a great idea to do a DLI 101. Also people agreeing with Ashley that the acquisition of English is different than Spanish due to the fact that Spanish is totally phonetical, that's true. So the letter sounds that way and not another way. English is a little more complex, as we can have different pronunciations for different letter combinations, as we know. All right, Bettina's saying she'll be happy to share, but they are still learning as well and building the plane as we fly. I think building the plane as we fly is the thing that educators do best. Certainly something we have done a lot in DLI programs. All right, well, let's move on. Let's take a look at some of our other professional strengths. Several people mentioned that subcriteria B, the DLI educator participates in frequent communication with other key stakeholders, is something that they're good at. And you need to think about, as always, what does frequent communication mean? Because that may look different in your setting depending on what kind of program you're working with, one way or two way, what level of program, elementary, middle, or high school, or a number of other factors that would impact not only how frequently you communicate, but who your key stakeholders are for that program. And finally, our subcriteria A, one person said that was their professional strength. The DLI educator maximizes ongoing communication between teacher and students outside of class. So again, think about how that works and what ongoing really means. How do you make that happen? How do you make sure it's happening over time and that you're fulfilling ongoing? And where are you meeting your students outside of class? We gave several examples before, but there are probably others that you can think of. All right, well, let's move forward. Like we said, we'll keep this activity up in your control panel because then you can see these subcriteria easily for some of the other things we're going to do a little bit later on. So our next activity actually asks us to look a little bit more closely at these. And we're going to do what's called Waterfall in the chat. You see I've got a nice little graphic about that. Sometimes this is called Flood the Chat. But with as often as floods are associated with hurricanes here in the Southeast, we tend to go with Waterfall in the chat because we get a nice visual of that. We're going to look at these 2 or 3 subcriteria, and in the chat box, answer this question. First of all, we're going to type the letter of one subcriteria that we think is important for K-12 DLI programs or classrooms. Now, the one you choose, the A, B, C, or D, can be one that was a professional strength for you, but it does not have to be. you're just looking at these sub-criteria sort of with a new set of eyes to think about which one you want to talk about as being important for K-12 DLI programs or classrooms. Then, in 15 words or less, you'll explain why you think this sub-criteria is critical for DLI programs and classrooms. So 15 words or less, think, a tweet or something like that, so you kind of limit yourself. I know as language educators that can be a challenge sometimes, but I have faith that you can do that well. But here's the waterfall part of it. Type that up, type your response up with the letter you choose and then your explanation in 15 words or less, but don't hit enter until I say go. Because then when we all enter our answers at the same time, we'll see truly a waterfall in the chat of all of our responses. So I'm going to give us about 3 minutes. Go ahead and type your response. So type the letter you're going to talk about, and then in 15 words or less, explain why you think this sub-criteria is critical for DLI. But wait until I say the magic word before you share it. All right, we got about another minute to go. So be sure you're getting your answer typed up and ready to do our waterfall in the chat. All right, let's see the waterfall. Be sure you type the letter that you're focusing on and go. And let's see the waterfall in the chat of all the responses. Don't be shy. If you're finishing up, that's okay. You can enter it and put it in whenever you get done. All right, Ivana, do you want to kind of summarize what we're seeing here? Although I think everyone can see it too. Good, yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing lots of interesting answers, lots of letter Ds, and a number of different responses to the letter Ds, talking about the collaboration and the support. Really having the collaboration, that was called a regular program at one place, but having collaboration with those that aren't already steeped in the ways of DLI, and really helping there to be authentic learning and how important that is to what's happening in our DLI programs. Let's see, we got some more Ds that came in down here. Yes, sharing experiences improves teaching. And then we had a C that talks about the age-old issue of working in silos and how it has to be a school-wide endeavor. no matter what the content is, everybody needs to feel part of the program. So it's very important. And then we had an A, helping students after school, developing their strong bonds. So really quite a range here. I don't believe I saw any B's, which is okay. But when we look at B's and the teacher participates in frequent communication with other key stakeholders, I think some of that got woven in with some of those other answers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because, really, as with most things, right, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just a matter of, in your thinking today, what do you think is important for our DLI programs and classrooms, and what examples can you come up with? So thank you for sharing so many examples and your thinking on these sub-criteria in relation to your DLI programs and classrooms. Okay, so now that we've really gotten quite familiar, I think, with our TEL sub-criteria with Collaboration 3, we also want to take a look at this from some different perspectives. And I told you early on, we would be looking at how we communicate with stakeholders by collaborating with the media. Now, we've talked a little bit about communication, and obviously in our responses already in our thinking. But we really want to focus on communicating with stakeholders, because communicating with our colleagues and other educators is one thing, but we need to also step outside of our school and of our program and think about who are the other stakeholders we need to communicate with, how might we do that effectively, and what should our message be? So we have two examples or two perspectives today about collaborating with the media. And I know educators had different feelings about working with the media and how that works in their communities or not. And it can be a challenge sometimes. But when you have a new program, like a new concept program with a DLI, where you don't have a lot of adults in the community who are familiar with that, you do have to communicate about it and educate them about it so that they understand what's happening and why being in a DLI program helps all students, closes the achievement gaps, and is a real benefit to that school and that community and those students. So when we talk today about guest speakers, we were fortunate because we were able to find guest speakers, if you will, but through some of the media reports from our DLI programs here in North Carolina. So NC DLI has been in the news already this school year. Not a big surprise. We have two different reports that came across our feeds that we thought were really good examples of how a DLI program communicates with stakeholders. Now, they're doing it in different ways. So the first one on the left is from Mooresville Graded Schools. They had a newspaper article, as you can see, in the Statesville Record and Landmark, where the headline was "Making Great Progress, Dual Immersion Program Preparing Mooresville Students for Multi-Global Society." What's happening in the Mooresville Graded School District right now is that they had never had a DLI program before the school year, and they decided to not only launch a DLI program in one of their kindergartens at one of their elementaries, but to actually launch 3 of them simultaneously, so that there are DLI programs in 3 different elementary schools. And that's an option for families across their attendance areas. This was a relatively recent article, as you can see. It just got published on September 26th, so it is not yet a month old. So you see kind of the screenshots from it, and you're going to get a chance to kind of look at that one in a minute if you choose this for our next activity. Also, on the right-hand side, we had another article come out, and in fact, it's even more recent than the first one. It's from just 10 days ago on October 4th, and it's from Buncombe County Schools. Buncombe County Schools is out in the western part of North Carolina, far western part, near Asheville. And there was a TV news report with their ABC affiliate, WLOS, about Glen Arden Elementary, and specifically, as it says there, the Glen Arden students and teachers celebrating Hispanic heritage. And so you see some screenshots, and obviously there's a video to watch. So we're going to take a look at both of these. When we were talking about these as examples and as perspectives on collaboration with stakeholders, one of the things we noticed is that we kind of think the Mooresville Graded Schools example from the newspaper is probably more focused on DLI programs. And the example from Buncombe County Schools, it's the TV news video, is probably more focused on DLI classrooms. But we'll let you decide actually what you think as we look at these and use these as perspectives on our CO3 TEL collaboration sub-criteria. So here's what we're going to do in our next activity, and this will take us a little while, but we've got plenty of time. So we're going to do an analysis of the two perspectives on CO3 through these media articles. First, what we want you to do is choose either the newspaper article to read or the TV news report to watch. Whichever one you choose, it'll take you probably about 5 minutes either to read through the article or to watch the video and make sure you have everything. So your choice which one you choose, but that's the first thing you'll do. Then we want you to analyze what you learned about the DLI program and or the DLI classroom by answering some questions. So again, you're looking for what they're sharing in those articles and reports that tells you, communicates about the DLI program or the DLI classrooms in that program. And here are our focus questions. The first one is, how does this information support communication with key stakeholders or between teachers and students outside of class? You're probably already thinking that's actually sub-criteria A and B, and you are correct. Also, another focus question is, how does this article or report expand an understanding of language development or show educators collaborating to support learning? Obviously, those are sub-criteria C and D. So you'll be looking at the video or reading the article with those kinds of questions in mind. Then, when we're done with that, in the chat box, we'll do kind of what we did before. We'll type the letter of the question we chose to focus on, either A or B, and then your response, but then we'll wait until we click enter, until I say go, so we can read the waterfall responses in the chat again. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to stop here and ask Ivana to go ahead and provide the resources for our first part. As we said, you can either choose the newspaper article to read, and she's just posted a link to that from the Statesville Record and Landmark newspaper, or you can watch the TV news report about DLI programs in Buncombe County schools. So again, that video, by the time you watch it and so forth, probably this will take you about 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and let's do that. And then as we get near to time, I'll go ahead and put our additional instructions up on the screen so that you can be following along and working on what you need to as we go. All right, we're at about 5 minutes, so hopefully you've had a chance to read the newspaper article or watch the TV news report. Now go ahead and pick either A or B to answer and start typing your answer in the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. You may also want to indicate which article or report you're referring to, either by the name of the school or district, or just which one it was. All right, get busy with that, and we'll go ahead and do our waterfall in the chat here in about 2 minutes. All right, let's get ready to share our waterfall in the chat. I see that we've got an early bird who's actually already shared a response to question B. But let's hang on. And when I say the magic word, oh, too late, go. Looks like the waterfall has already started.
Sometimes you got that little trickle before it really starts flowing. So that was great.
Before we start talking about our response to these questions and our analysis of what we were able to learn about communication with stakeholders here, I do want to give a shout out and a congratulations to these two districts and their DLI programs. It's always nice to have good media coverage that really communicates what's happening in your schools. And we see here, you know, in districts that's starting 3 brand new DLI programs, as well as an elementary school that's had a DLI program for a while now, in a district that has a number of them, including ones at the middle school level. So shout out to Mooresville Graded Schools and Buncombe County Schools. All right, Ivana, let's take a look. What are we seeing here in answer to question A? How does this information support communication with key stakeholders or between teachers and students outside of class?
We have one that says it's wonderful to share the diverse cultural nuances within a language, whether it's by wearing the traditional clothing, sharing other cultural practices with students and families. They also talk about how it builds community and engages everyone in great conversation, not to mention building the school spirit. So definitely all of those things. We also have for A that it supports communication with stakeholders by informing those outside of the school community of all that's going on and sharing the good news of what's happening. And absolutely, you know, when you get to see your school on the news for something good, that is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. And now people that may have never heard about it will have the opportunity to learn more. I think that covers the A's. We got a lot of B's. Anybody else want to add any other A's? So really looking at ways to bring all sorts of key stakeholders into their involvement in the program is fantastic. So now we've got a lot of B's, talking about the news article that's highlighting the collaboration of the educators, how it informs the community and shows the relevance of learning a second language, especially when you can point out things that everybody's looking for, like standardized testing, having higher scores. Let's see, more about B. I think one of the B's was an A. Okay, so be students learning about the Hispanic Heritage Month and getting to share with their parents and teachers the dressing up in the car line. And let me go back to the trickle. This is a personal experience where Geoff has had the opportunity to experience dual language learning from first grade in various states. And it's clear that teachers working together to engross dual language skills at an early age improves learning, test scores, students have greater global perspective. So just an all-around strengthening of the students. And I think I have touched on all the answers.
Great, thank you. Well, it is something to think about with these two perspectives, and also to think about how that might look in your own context. What if your DLI program or your DLI classrooms were the subject of a newspaper article or a TV news report? How would that look? What would you want to communicate? How would you want it to be? Now, these two were fortunate, like we said, these turned up in our feeds. One of them turned up in just some of the things we look at on a daily basis about language programs and came to our email. The other one actually came to NCDPI Communications first, and they passed it along to us. However, once we celebrate at the state level, one thing I will share with you is that we often get to celebrate at the national level. And both of these articles also appeared in the ACTFL Smart Brief, and one of them in the ASCD Smart Brief, which is a daily publication across the country for educators. And so we got a lot of play, if you will, airtime with our DLI programs here in North Carolina, which we're very grateful for, because as we said, it educates everyone and it points out the great programs we have here in North Carolina. So as we continue to think about these reports in our own setting, we're going to move on to the next part of our presentation. Here we're going to look at evidence of CO3 and specifically characteristics and behaviors, because we as teachers, we as educators, when we talk about evaluating something, even reflecting on ourselves and doing a self-assessment, we always say, well, what evidence do we have of this? And what can we observe? What characteristics or behaviors do we observe in a K-12 DLI program or a DLI classroom, particularly with pedagogy and what's working with students? So the next bit, we're going to take a look at these sub-criteria from the lens of characteristics and behaviors. And so I would ask you to pause for a minute and think about, what do teachers, coaches, specialists, principals, coordinators, any of whom are involved with DLI programs, what do they do in DLI programs and classrooms to show evidence of CO3 sub-criteria? And again, that's on the screen, but also on your control panel. What is it that they do? Well, we know, being the teachers that we are, that we look for these answers based on the verbs. How kind of action are they taking? Again, what do they do that shows evidence of the CO3 sub-criteria? So when we look at those verbs, we see them maximizing ongoing communication, participating in frequent communication, partnering with other educators, and collaborating with other educators. So maximizing, participating, partnering, and collaborating in order to facilitate frequent two-way communication. So for this next activity, we're going to ask you to do a little bit of self-evaluation and think about the characteristics and behaviors that you could find for the CO3 sub-criteria that we're looking at so carefully today. We're going to use a Jamboard. That's what that little icon is in the upper right-hand part of the screen. A Jamboard, by the way, is simply another Google tool like a Google Doc or Google Spreadsheet or Google Slides. So if you use Google, you have access to Jamboard. And it kind of works like, a poster where you put sticky notes like exit tickets on and things like that. But we're going to consider the question, what characteristics in our behaviors would you see in your DLI program or classroom if you were looking for evidence for one of the CO3 sub-criteria? So what would you look for? And how would this vary based on the grade span that you're working with, elementary, middle school, or high school? The location of your DLI program or DLI classroom, maybe in urban or suburban or rural settings. And we have all of those options for DLI in North Carolina, of course. Or maybe based on the key stakeholders and who you were defining them as. Who are you actually thinking about communicating with? And what are their needs as far as understanding your program and championing your work as DLI educators? So how would it vary based on whatever your setting is, your grade span, your location, your key stakeholders, or whatever other details you can think of. So we're going to ask you to think about which CO3 subcriteria you want to write about to answer those questions. And then we're going to ask you on a sticky note you create for the Jamboard activity to title your post with the letter of the subcriteria, so A, B, C, or D, becoming, I think, quite familiar with them now. Write your response to the questions in 2 sentences or less. Then you can include your name on the sticky or just remain anonymous. It's totally up to you. And then take a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the Jamboard and what people are sharing with you. Once we get started with this activity, it'll last 6 minutes start to finish. We are conscious of our time. We don't want to go over time today, but we want to make sure you get a chance to think about these criteria and subcriteria in ways that you can take back and use in your settings. So before we actually get started with the activity, I want to show you what a Jamboard is. Now, I will start by saying, who here has worked with Google Jamboard before? Please just raise your electronic hand if you have already worked with a Google Jamboard, maybe in professional learning, maybe with your students. Who has experience with Google Jamboard?
I've got one hand.
Okay, good deal. Well, I'm glad then that we're introducing this tool and kind of going through it step by step, because it's a great tool to have. And of course, with Google, you have it for free. And you can use it in a lot of different ways. We love to use it in professional learning because it does replicate that, filling out your thoughts on a sticky and then sharing them in an activity or a learning center or with others that you're working with. So the Jamboard, when we go to it, simply has a little control panel. You see it up here on the screen. And so what you'll do to get your little sticky note or post-it note electronically is you'll click on the little post-it note icon. Our little arrow should be a little further up. It's the 4th one down. Then once you do that, the sticky note will come up. You can choose what color you want your sticky note to be. I know we always have colors, and some people like to color code, so it can be yellow, green, blue, pink, or orange. Then you'll write whatever it is you want to share your response, and then you'll click save. And once you click save, it'll put your little post-it note, your sticky, onto the Jamboard. Now our Jamboard, we have a bit.ly link for it, as you see up on top of the screen. I'm going to click on that real quick just to show you how this looks on the actual Jamboard. When we go there, I said it's a Google tool. I've already got our subcriteria there. And again, the control panel is on the left-hand side. You click the 4th one down, that's the little sticky note. Once you do that, it comes up. You can write, let's say, whatever letter your subcriteria is, and write a couple of sentences just to kind of explain your answer to the question. When you're done, you can hit save, and then your little sticky goes on to the Jamboard. You can then write another one, maybe change the color of it if you want to respond to something else, or just click cancel, and then you can start to see everyone else's sticky notes appearing on the Jamboard and what their responses are. All right, so that's how we do sticky on a Jamboard, and that's our activity. I'm going to put up the instructions again. Ivana will add the link to the Jamboard in our chat box so that you can get to it using that little bit.ly link we have. And like I said, you're answering these questions. So what characteristics and behaviors would you see in your DLI program or classroom if you're looking for evidence for one of the CO3 subcriteria? And how would this vary based on the grade span, location, key stakeholders, etc., that you work with in your DLI program or classroom? All right, be sure and type the subcriteria letter in and your response. We'll let you go ahead and work on that, and we'll be checking on the Jamboard periodically to see those responses appearing. All right, it looks like some stickies are appearing in response to our questions. Keep adding those on, and once you've added yours, take a look at what other people are sharing too. All right, our Jamboard is up. Let's take a look at some of the responses. If you're still posting a response, feel free to add that. Looks like some are rearranging their stickies. Ivana, let's take a look. What are we finding here with the answers to our questions?
I was the one rearranging the stickies. Trying to make them a little more readable. So lots of different things that people are using. There's a mention of Class Dojo, and I've moved them, so now I don't see WeChat, Skype, different things that are used for translations, for parent newsletters, calls, really finding ways to get parents more involved through that. Those are two of the stickies, these two. Let's see. Parent newsletters, student-led conferences. I love student-led conferences. Portfolios, of course, phone calls home. Canvas is mentioned here. So lots of different technology programs that are being mentioned. Let's see. If there was any other technology, specifically Class Dojo again, and newsletters. So we're seeing a lot of overlap, but then some things that are a little bit different as well. There's one here that expect teachers to have meeting times to exchange ideas and support children according to their individual needs. So it sounds like sort of like what we're doing with MTSS. And yes, the language programs need to be tailored to the groups. Multiple examples of communication with different stakeholders. Again, getting into some of the similar things. What have I missed that might be different? Bilingual pairs, that was what I had put over here. Putting students in bilingual pairs so that they can learn from each other. We got a little more on communication and getting feedback, as well as observations and experiences, and having equity in the environment. So a lot of pieces right around here with different technologies that people are using. So I don't know if anybody heard of anything new when they were looking at the technologies or not. I don't think I've ever used WeChat. That's a new one for me. Did I missed anything?
You could also have a program newsletter for the whole school and all the parents who are involved in the DLI program. But we're seeing lots of different things and different apps that work for people. And don't forget too that some of the technology and the media we can access, like we saw with our two perspective examples, depends on where you are. You know, almost every community has some kind of newspaper, whether it's a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper. It kind of depends on the size of the community, right? But the kinds of things we're talking about here, let's say with newsletters and announcements and different things that are going out, can also find their way into local newspapers, but also might be more internal communications for the people directly involved in the DLI program. Likewise, if you're in a larger community, maybe a suburban area or an urban setting, you probably have more access to that second perspective we saw where we had a TV news reporter out visiting the school. Of course, that can happen truly in any community, but it's more likely to happen if the reporter doesn't have to travel too far. So think about how you could use not only the technology you have on hand as a DLI educator to communicate with key stakeholders that are more close to your program, but also how you could extend that out, how you could use the media or social media in your community to talk about your DLI program, to build understanding, to increase communication. And we haven't spent a whole lot of time. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I noticed that Alexandra has her hand up. I don't know if that's on purpose, if she wants to share something with us now or not. So Alexandra, if you want to type in the chat box if you want it to be unmuted. Okay, no problem. I just didn't want to miss some grand idea that wasn't on the sticky notes. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Now, one of the things we haven't tackled a lot yet is about two-way communication. There's a lot here about one-way communication, sharing information out to students, to parents, to other educators, to other stakeholders. But we haven't talked a lot about communication coming back in and what we do with that. And given our time, it's something I think we'll just kind of ponder and consider how that looks in our DLI program, particularly when we move out further into the community and we get feedback from those around us about our DLI program, or DLI classrooms, or even questions about that. How does it work? What does it look like? How do students develop bilingualism and biliteracy skills over time? Because again, a lot of the adults in our world around the DLI program probably didn't have an experience of a DLI program when they were students. So this is new to them. And we need to educate them and share the huge benefits that we see our students reaping from our DLI programs and classrooms. All right, well, I hope you use that activity to kind of start reflecting on your own program and classrooms and consider where you might go next when you think about the characteristics and behaviors you would like to see in your DLI program or classroom, whether you're seeing them now or you'd like to see more of them in some way as you move forward and continually improve your program. I am conscious of our time though, so we're going to have to close out our broadcast for today. We are at the portion where we have our wrap up and reminders. And the first thing I would say to you is always let's stay in communication and be collaborative like we have been talking about today by making sure that you're on the NCDPI listservs. Yvonne is going to put, she already has put in the chat box, a place where you can sign up for that. Many of you are probably already on the DLI Educators listserv, but just in case you aren't, we always add our participants in our DLI webinars, as well as our registrants who maybe couldn't join us today after all. We always put them on the DLI Educators listserv. Anyone can sign up for that. You can be anywhere in the world and get the information about our DLI programs and the details we're sharing about, like these webinars with professional learning, the Canvas course we have, as well as announcements and messages about things like professional development done by our professional organizations, or even details about the resources we have to support DLI programs. You're also welcome to sign up for other NCDPI listservs or updates. There's one for Linguafolio, which is a formative assessment tool for language learners. There's one for world language instructors, and there's one called World Language Education News, which is usually done more by parents who want to sign up, but always educators are welcome. And then there's many others. Ivana, what listservs does ESL actually run that might be helpful to DLI educators?
Right, you have to scroll down to the bottom to find ours. It's called Teachers of ELS. This would be the one you would go down to for that.
Yeah, I'll just show you. If you click on the link and you submit your email, this is what Yvonne is talking about. You have all kinds of topics you can subscribe to. Any of these are available to anyone who signs up. You can see I'm signed up on a lot of them because I try to get information from across our agency in all different areas to share with teachers in the work that I do. But yes, we do have
The teachers of English learners, it's actually spelled out. Yeah, that would be the one.
Yeah. All right, so that's a resource for you too, to make sure you get our updates and reminders about future webinars and other resources and materials that we're sharing. Also, we want to talk to you a little bit about this year's DLI webinar series and what's available to you. First of all, as we said at the beginning, the materials and recording from each webinar are posted as archives. That includes the presentation slides that you're seeing here in 3 different formats: Google Slides, PowerPoint, and PDF. That way you have full freedom to decide which format you need in case you want to just view it, let's say as a PDF, or if you want to repurpose that and download the slides and create your own presentation using these materials. We also post our handouts, like the collaboration document from Tel, and any hyperlinks we've used that might be helpful to people. This year, we're posting those in a Canvas space rather than on our Google site webpage. That's because we want to make sure those resources are all together and organized in a way that we can use going forward. Plus, the archives will be available for a period of time and can be completed asynchronously to earn a certificate of completion. So even if you weren't part of this broadcast, but or you were and you want to share it with a colleague who wasn't, you'll have the opportunity to go to the archives and complete a Qualtrics survey or exit ticket for this particular webinar as your asynchronous work, and you can still earn a certificate of completion. If you want more details, you can go to our NC DLI webinar series page for information about upcoming webinars, the dates they have, which Tel project criteria we're going to be looking at closely. All of that information is posted and available to you. And I see Ivana has already added the link to our NC DLI webinar series page for you to access that information. Our next broadcast won't be until December, a couple months away, but you can sign up now if you would like, as well as the ones that are coming in the spring. All right, let's talk about our CEU certificates. There was a lot of interest in that early on, that by participating in it in a live broadcast, you earn a contact hour or CEU certificate. Please note, as it says there at the bottom, our public school units are PSUs, so that's districts and charter schools, and I think for Virginia that means divisions and charter schools. They must approve your professional development offerings in any format. So whether it's virtual, synchronous, or asynchronous, blended or hybrid, or in person, they have final approval. But just know that individuals who participate in this live broadcast can earn that contact hour towards the CEU for license renewal. It will come in the form of an email with an attached certificate of attendance approximately 1 week from today. So it does take us a little bit of time to process these archives and get them posted for you, as well as turn in a list of names of people who should get emailed a certificate. And then, like I said, the archives will be available for a period of time, and they can be completed by individuals asynchronously to earn a certificate of completion. We've typically been posting that information about a week after the broadcast, and then you have until usually the next broadcast in the DLI webinar series to complete that for your certificate of completion if you want to do that. Oh, and I cannot forget, before we go, I told you we had a special announcement, something brand new for our DLI programs here in North Carolina, and this is it. Some of you know, I think very well, in fact, that we use PowerSchool in North Carolina as our Student Information System, or SIS. We have been working several years, I would say 3 to 5 years at this point, to have a way to indicate which students in our schools and districts are in our DLI programs. And with PowerSchool, you I'm sure are familiar with the fact that course codes and scheduling and transcripts and all are part of that system. So we have to be careful how we do that. And so what we've come up with as a good solution here in North Carolina to better track our DLI programs and think about how many students we have participating at every grade span is what's called a DLI Special Program Attribute within PowerSchool. And it's actually specifically, when you get in there, called the NC Dual Language Immersion Attribute. So DLI programs can now indicate which students at each school and grade level are enrolled in DLI. And we want you to share this with your data managers. They're the ones, obviously, who probably have to put a lot of the details into PowerSchool for your programs in your schools. So we have a link to a 3.5-minute video. It's the PowerSchool SIS video reference guide specifically for the NC Dual Language Immersion Attribute. It's posted on YouTube by our digital teaching and learning colleagues, and you see there the YouTube link as well as a screenshot of it on the right-hand side. So again, this is brand new. This will be a huge help in thinking about how we identify our students across North Carolina being in DLI programs and how we've seen our numbers grow. Some of you have been in our presentations where we've talked about the number of programs we have. It's well over 200 K-12 in 8 different languages. And so this is a way for us to get an idea of the number of students at the elementary level, middle school level, and high school level too.
And Emery, I'm going to tell you, there is a question from the previous slide. You mentioned the Canvas database, and the listener was saying that when they click on those links, they're not finding Canvas. So could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our Canvas hub for our DLI webinar series, where our archives will be, is not yet posted. That's because this is the first webinar. And so as we create these webinars and then launch our series, we are going to create those Canvas spaces, and we will have that up within a week, like I said, of our broadcast. If I go over to the DLI webinar series page, which is I'm sure where you're at, you'll see our series here, of course. And when I scroll down and look at like our broadcast for today on collaboration, when we have that Canvas hub ready to go, which should be by next Wednesday, but maybe a bit earlier if we work quickly, you'll see here next to where we have the link, for example, to register for today, that will be replaced by a link to the archive space and that Canvas hub. We're offering that new this year, and we're really excited about releasing that, but it has taken us some time to make sure we set up our Canvas hubs correctly, because we're doing this for all of our webinar series, not just DLI, but the World Language one, the Linguafolio one, and of course, our DLI work we're sharing together today.
Thank you. And I didn't want to take away from the new announcement, but I wanted to make sure that got answered before that user signed off.
Okay, no worries. So like I said, we've got this brand new DLI special program to attribute in PowerSchool. This will give us the opportunity to really make sure we know how many students are benefiting from DLI programs in North Carolina. So it's an important first step for us to have this in our PowerSchool system. That's it for today. We thank you for joining us. This is our NCDPI DLI team. You saw Ivana and I at the start, of course, but you can always contact us as co-leads of the DLI work at NCDPI via email or phone. You see that on there. We also have the DLI Google site that has the bit.ly link, the NCDPI, sorry, I put the wrong one. I'll have to correct that on slide. We have, it says NCDLI site, actually. I'll fix that. But we also post on Twitter about this, and we have a new hashtag this year, hashtag DLI and NC. We also want to let you know, because she's here too, Dr. Stacy Daniel, our supervisor, the section chief of English Language Arts and Languages section, can also be contacted. She's part of our DLI team. And Teresa Parker is our administrative specialist for our section. She's the one that will be sending out the emails with the certificates of attendance in about a week for your participation today. That's all we have. Any last thoughts, Ivana or Stacy?
Just thank you all for joining us.
Great. All right, and Stacy's saying we've covered it. Great. Well, again, thank you for joining us today. We appreciated learning with you today and hearing your feedback about the Tel Project criteria and collaboration and how you make that happen in DLI programs and classrooms.